Good morning and or good afternoon.
Thank you, Arca, and good morning and good afternoon for Sun. I am Pamela Garman Johnson, and I serve as the National Vice President of Health Equity for the American Heart Association. The American Heart Association's Empowered to Serve platform reflects the guiding values of our organization by meeting people where they are, by building powerful partnerships. We seek to achieve health justice and health equity by elevating those key stakeholders, organizations, and social enterprises that are investing in transforming their communities. Communities have localized solutions that will help individuals and families escalate beyond poverty and achieve improved health outcomes. No one knows the changes of a community more than the community itself. We at the American Heart Association want to be a catalyst for change. We are here today to offer information based upon the quest for more affordable and sustainable housing in our communities. I now have the honor of introducing Dr. Eduardo Sanchez, who is the Chief Medical Officer of Prevention for the American Heart Association.
I do want to start on a serious note, and that is, if you haven't already, please take a moment today to pray for Jacob Blake and his family. I'll just leave it at that. On behalf of our senior leadership team at the American Heart Association, I want to say thank you so much for the work that's been done and for participating in this event. I want to particularly thank Enterprise and Kresge. You've heard our mission statement, which is to be a relentless force for a world of longer, healthier lives. That mission statement really is more important than ever. I think was already stated. It should be stated again. But as it relates to today and what we're going to be talking about, I think I would put it in two words. Housing matters. Housing matters for health. Heart disease and stroke are the #1 and #5 causes of death in the United States. And actually, footnote, #1 and #6, because COVID-19 is going to become the #3 cause and displaced stroke as #5. But that's another seminar for another day. Heart disease and stroke are highly preventable. But systemic inequities, inequalities, if you will, make it difficult for all people to live their healthiest, longest lives. Today in the United States, approximately 50 million people are living in areas with inadequate resources for health. And that number may be actually higher given all that's happened since the early part of this year in COVID-19. These neighborhoods, these places where 50 million people live, are affected by what we call social determinants of health. This means factors such as income, education, race, ethnicity, access to healthcare, and affordable housing that can influence how well and how long a person lives. You may not know this, but in many cities in the United States, life expectancy can differ by as much as 10, 15, 20 years for people in the same city who are just living 5 miles apart. And although I will be the first to say that medical care is really, really important, I'm a family physician by training, we know that only 20% of our health is determined by medical care. And you may be wondering, what? And that's because 80% is determined by social and economic factors like education, like income, by health behaviors, by whether you smoke, are able to eat healthfully and be physically active, and housing. Now, I am someone who, throughout my entire career, has relied on good science to guide my thinking, whether that's about what to do today when I step out of my house, or when I was seeing patients, what were the things I needed to make sure that I was offering my patients to optimize their health. Well, just last month, in the name of science, AHA released a scientific statement, Importance of Housing and Cardiovascular Health and Well-Being. As I said, housing and health are connected, and the science confirms that. To address the social determinants of health, communities benefit from localized solutions to improve overall quality of health. And no one knows solutions in a community as well as the members themselves, including those in the faith community. Your places of worship, your houses of worship can be agents of positive change, change that lasts and lasts and lasts for the health of your community by making secure housing a possibility for your community. Unused land and property belonging to faith-based organizations can be an asset in helping to secure housing for those facing housing insecurity, which helps lead to better health outcomes. So in short, the connection is clear: faith, housing, and health.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sanchez. Thank you for your insights and the connection between health and housing. We're now very fortunate to have two longstanding volunteers of the American Heart Association, Marcella Roberts, who is an attorney in the Birmingham, Alabama area, and also a member of our national board, as well as Melvin Thompson from Chicago, who's the executive director of the Andaleo Institute. They're here to tell you some practical feet on the ground answers to housing needs in their communities.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So statistics show that approximately 21 million U.S. households were housing insecure in 2014, meaning they spent more than 30% of their income on housing. Housing expenses above 30% of an individual or family's income often leads a family to make trade-offs and decisions between paying for housing versus other basic needs like food, medication, transportation, education, and even health care. As an attorney and developer of affordable housing, I give my all towards providing quality, safe, comfortable, I even consider it beautiful, affordable housing for families to call home. For families making minimum wage or a working wage, 30% of their income tends to not be sufficient to cover housing expenses. Therefore, we're having millions of families spending upwards of 70% of their income just to have a decent place to live. Many families consider their place of worship as a trusted source for many aspects of their life, and housing is no different. Having a faith-based organizations to partner with us in the development of affordable housing is a win-win for the families, the community, and the church. So the church or our faith-based organizations have long been a source of food, transportation, and education in our communities. And now we see them stepping up to meet the critical needs in the areas of trying to bring community health centers to their neighborhoods and also affordable housing. Statistics have shown that Blacks and Hispanic households are almost twice as likely as white households to be insecure. So experiences associated with housing insecurity, such as joblessness, lack of transportation, and incarceration can make it difficult to secure housing. When you don't have a safe, sanitary place to live, it can negatively affect your physical and mental health, making it harder to get an education and even secure stable employment. That's why we're committed to working with the faith-based community to create healthy neighborhoods. Living in a healthier neighborhood has been shown to help families build prosperity, pursue healthier lifestyles. When families can feel safe, have jobs, quality schools, healthy foods, health care, parks and green spaces, transportation, socially supportive services, they tend to achieve a greater overall well-being. The faith-based community is seen as a source for healing, comfort, and peace. So let's join together to bring healing to millions of families by working together to produce affordable housing to help heal our communities. Thank you for being with us today. Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Melvin Thompson.
We are the manifestation of what all you just said, Marcella. We're the Andaleo Institute. I'm Melvin Thompson, the executive director. We're the nonprofit community development arm of a very large church in Chicago, Trinity United Church of Christ, located on the far south side of Chicago in the Washington Heights community. As part of our corridor revitalization efforts, back in 2017, we saw housing as one of our assets, because that's part of our mission to strengthen assets in the community. And so we have always had historically high levels of home ownership in our community. In fact, if you look at the Census Bureau, Black home ownership in the United States hovers around 44%. And in our Washington Heights community, it's right around 66%. So we're very, very proud of that. Unfortunately, the housing crisis of 2009, really, we saw some deterioration in our market and in our community. And I saw something that, we could be more of a stopgap to ensuring that our neighborhood remained stable and increased it. And so we partnered with the Cook County Land Bank in this wonderful pilot program, and we established what we call the Andaleo Sustainable Home Ownership Project, or ESHOP for short. So over the last 3 years, we've purchased, rehabbed, and sold 5 homes in our community, and those neighborhoods actually connect to our 95th Street corridor. So we stabilize the community, we help build wealth, we're giving people peace of mind. And so we're really, really excited about that. I'm so proud of it. I just happened to have an award that we received. I don't know if you can see this, but we were the Nonprofit Community Developer of the Year in 2018. And so we're very proud of that. Just happen to have this with me, by the way. There's another lens that we actually saw this through our work on the ground, and that was through policy and advocacy, because we just were fortunate a couple of years ago of having a major transit station right in the footprint of our corridor be renovated for a record $300 million. And so there's a lot of vacancy and missing teeth in the corridor and in those adjoining blocks. We saw fit to actually push the city, and now we're part of a working group to advise the city on equitable transit-oriented development in and around that station. There's going to be a policy and recommendation that'll be for public notice in the next couple of weeks that's really going to offer recommendations and suggestions to the city around how to build more affordable housing, more workforce development, and just inclusion and diversity around those transit stations. And we basically have a blank canvas in which to do this. So we're really excited about this opportunity. I should mention Enterprise Community Partners is no stranger to Andaleo. In 2018, we received a very competitive housing and urban development Section 4 grant to help us coordinate our efforts. So our Chicago division was really helpful in bridging us. And we're a small shop, very small community-based organization. So we took community investment to heart. And so we're really excited because we know that now there are at least 5 families that have peace of mind, that start their day in a house that they own. And I should mention, one of those homes has in-law accessibility. So an older adult family member came and has a separate floor from the rest of the family, which was really, really important to them. And as we see that trend, particularly in our community of Washington Heights, where there's a lot of aging, we have the highest median age in the city of Chicago. So it's very important from a transitional standpoint that we accommodate people who want to age and live in place in our community. And so we're really excited that our longtime partners, the American Heart Association, have been with us from the very beginning and have been catalytic in extending our small organization to a national stage like this. So we're really pleased, and we look forward to stronger partnerships throughout as we go forward.
Thank you so much, Melvin and Marcella. I think those examples of being on the ground and doing this work actively every day are so important. We're going to extend that train of thought with Reverend David Bowers, who is the Vice President of the Mid-Atlantic region. And I've been privileged to work with David and actually tour some of the housing developments that he's done in the Washington, D.C. area with faith-based organizations. David, we look forward to your advice.
Christy, thank you so much. Very much appreciated, and a blessed day to everyone. Want to thank the American Heart Association for the strong collaboration and the spirit in which the staff has worked with my colleagues and I, and want to thank Kresge again for the support that has enabled this. We are a national organization, proven and powerful national nonprofit with a mission to create opportunity for low and moderate income households through affordable housing and thriving communities. You will see that I am the leader of our Mid-Atlantic office. I'm blessed to be able to lead our Mid-Atlantic office, which covers Maryland, DC, and Northern Virginia. And Enterprise operates across a platform that includes various financing options, policy, and programmatic work. So who we are, for our faith-based development initiative, I will say to Mr. Thompson that part of the inspiration, actually, there's no accident in how things work. When I was a young seminarian getting ready to finish school at Howard University School of Divinity, I had an opportunity to sit with Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright, the former pastor at Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, and got some inspiration from him, as well as an opportunity to sit with Reverend Dr. Floyd Flake in New York City. And so the groundwork for this, I believe, was laid many, many years ago. So no accident that you fast forward. Our faith-based development initiative at Enterprise really is designed to help get new units of affordable housing built, as well as community facilities, working with houses of worship who own land that's undeveloped or underdeveloped. And our approach is to help them make an informed go or no-go decision. And if they decide to go, to connect them to the intellectual and financial capital that they need as they are moving forward. So who we are, as you see, when we initially started with some partners, including a local nonprofit collaboration, East of the River Clergy Police Community Partnership, Georgetown University and Wesley Seminary have been strategic advisors over the years. And we are currently collaborating with the University of Baltimore on a faith-based development initiative certificate program. So the why is pretty straightforward, but let me just say it, right? There's so much need as it relates to housing. You heard Dr. Sanchez and Ms. Roberts even talk about the importance of housing. Over 10,000 homeless folks were in just the DC metro area when we started in 2006. You have, like in communities around the country, 20% of all households were paying more than half of their income for their housing expenses. So it's a very high cost market. There's a lot of need, but there's also potential in the faith community. I knew that from my experiences working with the pastor who raised me in ministry, Reverend Dr. Joaquin Willis, who is now down in the Miami, Florida area. But analysis by the Urban Institute in 2019 showed that there's the potential to build anywhere from 40 to 100,000 plus new housing units on just 800 vacant parcels owned in several communities in the Washington, D.C. metro area. That's just one snapshot. The Turner Center, the University of California in Berkeley did a study recently looking at the potential for building on land owned by houses of worship in California. So there's a growing recognition that there's potential to, as Dr. Sanchez says, have houses of worship be agents of change based on the amount of land they own. So as I said, we really do look to be a connector to the intellectual and financial capital houses of worship need. So what we do, give you a quick overview, some of the things that we do. We offer trainings. The trainings are designed on different aspects of the development process. They are designed to not to make folks from houses of worship experts, but designed to make them comfortably conversant on different aspects of the process. So you see some of the topics that we cover: visioning process, the nuts and bolts of development. How do you access public money? How do you access private money? Exposing folks to government housing officials and bankers and the like. So we try to offer folks a range of information that allows them to become comfortable in the conversations with the professionals that they will engage with. We also, through the faith-based initiative, offer different types of grants that will be offered to help with things like market studies and feasibility analysis, to help folks, again, make that kind of informed go or no-go decision. You see here on this slide, we also offer varying types of technical assistance. We have organizational development. Some houses of worship have a nonprofit associated with it, but oftentimes it's a paper nonprofit, right? There's no paid staff, there's no functioning board, there's no meeting minutes, no audited financials. So we have organizational development consultants oftentimes who can provide technical assistance there. And then project-specific development technical assistance, someone who acts almost like an owner's rep to help sometimes for a limited scope of time with a house of worship who needs help either identifying a development partner and or in the negotiations as they're further along in the process. Bullpens of legal services, partnership. We always say if you're going to do a real estate development deal, have a real estate development lawyer. And so we have relationships with different university legal clinics. If we can go back one, we have relationships with different university legal clinics and the like that we can help refer folks to. And so development consultants, we also have bullpens of developers and development consultants who we can refer folks to. We don't tell people who to work with, but we expose them to people who we have talked to, who we know have a track record, but also a comfort level with working with houses of worship. So some of what we've been able to accomplish so far, you'll see that over 1,200 new units of housing, affordable housing in the DC metro and Baltimore area, as well as a health clinic with over 1,000 units in the pipeline, providing critical affordable housing options for folks. You'll see some of the dollar amounts that we have invested specifically at Enterprise. There are others who've invested dollars. This is just what we've invested between grants, loans, and equity, the 46 training sessions, the networking luncheons, and the collaboration, as I referred to earlier, with the University of Baltimore. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to highlight a couple of projects. There are several slides in here I actually won't even touch on, but they're in the deck. So if people get it, you'll get a range of things, but I'll highlight a couple of them. One is Plaza West, interestingly enough, here, Bible Way Church in Washington, D.C. 50 of these units are what are called grandparent housing for grandparents raising children, low-income grandparents who are raising their children, 50 units there, 173 units then of family housing, with 11 units set aside as permanent supportive housing by the Department of Behavioral Health in Washington, D.C. So a fascinating project in a very high-cost part of near downtown Washington, D.C. So just a tremendous benefit to the community. So this project is interesting, built by a Catholic church on land that had been an old convent here. Interestingly enough, this also is in a neighborhood, the Eckington neighborhood of Washington, D.C., that a couple of years ago was recognized as one of the most gentrified neighborhoods in the country by a national publication. 178 units of affordable housing for low-income folks, including 50 for extremely low-income people, really designed to help folks who may be transitioning out of homelessness or on the edge there. So a fascinating project there. And the Roundtree Residence is just an interesting example of a project developed by an AME church in Washington, D.C. with 91 units of senior housing and some amenities for seniors who are there. Great project. This is an interesting one here. Israel Baptist Church did a twofer, if you did, on their parking lot. They actually built this 3-story project. The first 2 stories are, they brought in as an anchor tenant, Unity Healthcare, which brought increased, enhanced, and expanded access to healthcare in this community. And the top floor is actually a banquet hall and meeting space that provides an amenity for the community, an affordable amenity, if you would, for the community, and obviously a source of revenue for the church and its associated nonprofit. And then right around the corner, we also have a 47-unit senior housing that they built about 2 blocks away from the church, right at the bottom of the hill, right across the street from a Metro transit stop and a brand new retail site. And so again, very highly gentrifying neighborhood right on the edge of Eckington that I talked about earlier. So an example of a church actually looking at and combining housing, healthcare, as well as a public amenity. So in my last couple of slides, last couple of minutes, what I'll do is share just a couple of things in terms of some insights. So for houses of worship in particular, there's an organizational assessment tool that Enterprise has developed, and we have houses of worship ask a number of questions. These are just a few. Do you have a separate entity to do your development or not? What are your financial goals? Do you expect cash flow from the development over time? Are you willing to subsidize the project or just want it to break even? No right or wrong answer, but this is the kind of question a house of worship should ask. What type of housing or community facility are you trying to develop? Who's your targeted market? Do you have any economic empowerment interests? There's a lot of talk these days around racial equity. Well, asking yourselves beyond the benefit the project will provide, the housing, do you want to create jobs for the community as part of the development? Do you want to make sure that some local businesses that maybe look like you and your members are getting the business? What do I mean by that? There are a lot of people who get paid on a development project, from the landscaper to the construction company to the banker to the title company to the lawyers. So there may be economic empowerment interests that you have in mind as well. Do you have site control of the land? Do you want to maintain ownership of the land over time, or site control, or are you looking to sell your land? Do you expect to have an active role in the development? Do you have a development team and or main point of contact? So these are some of the questions that we encourage folks to ask. So some of the lessons learned that we want to let folks know that as you get exposed to more of this, unfamiliarity with the development process and fear of the unknown often leads to lack of action by houses of worship. So extensive technical assistance is often needed, capacity building for the nonprofit entity that may be associated with the house of worship. The connection to what I call intellectual capital is critical. Developers, legal that I referred to earlier, and sometimes can be as important or more important than money, particularly in the early stages. The assistance with the go, no-go decisions is critical. Houses of worship, we've learned, need their own real estate lawyer, your own land use lawyer. So if you have a development partner, they'll probably have a lawyer that they're used to working with that may be a lawyer for the partnership. But we've heard from a number of houses of worship, it's good when you have your own lawyer whose only client is the house of worship. We know that there's a mismatch. What I always say that the frame of reference for developers is a quarterly timeline. The frame of reference for folks in the faith community oftentimes is eternity. So many times what we have to do is speed up the faith community and slow down the development community and try to help them meet somewhere in the middle. You'll see here a key role for clergy leaders, casting the vision, gaining buy-in for membership, delegating day-to-day management for the process. As you say, delegate authority, but not responsibility. And for any of those who are involved in program design on anything related to this, that the program evaluation is key and to evolve over time, listening to the needs of your participants. So why you should get involved, again, pretty straightforward. Houses of worship own a lot of land that is oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes debt-free. Affordable housing and community serving facilities align oftentimes with the mission of what the house of worship is trying to do. Identify some key leadership, take advantage of key partnerships like what you're hearing about today, and this is an exciting one with American Heart and Enterprise. And houses of worship can pursue building on land, whether you're big or small, predominantly Black, predominantly white, Asian, Latino, whether you are from a connectional polity or not, doesn't matter. There are various ways in which many houses of worship that we've worked with are land rich and cash poor, but have ways to figure out how to make it work. So final slide here, I just say is that we are excited about going national, and this collaboration with American Heart is really part of that. The work that we are doing across the country. You heard from Mr. Thompson even talking about how we're using some of our grant dollars to support work like in Chicago, some of the emerging efforts in some of our various enterprise markets around the country. We've seen that governments in places like New York City and Alameda County, California have looked at what we've done, I think, and learned from our lessons in the Mid-Atlantic. You'll see that we've had even involvement with a collaboration between the Catholic Church and the Buddhist green housing effort in some cities around the country, and even mentioned by the Pope in a Vatican address. And there's a paper that's been done that is a resource by a colleague of mine, and I was able to do an opening in that paper about leveraging property owned by faith-based organizations. It's a white paper that gives a little more information and detail.
As you've been hearing today, there is significant opportunity to improve the health of our communities by promoting policies and initiatives that bring healthy housing within reach for everyone, including and especially the most vulnerable among us. Addressing disparities in housing access, affordability, and quality will require multi-sectoral collaboration, which we support wholeheartedly. Alongside the faith community and nonprofit partners, our government officials at the state and local and federal level all have a role to play in ensuring equitable access to affordable and healthy housing. While the American Heart Association is not proactively engaging in policy campaigns on housing, we applaud and support those who are. There are policy positions available on our website, and we hope they can be a resource to those of you engaging in this important work. Those have been linked in the chat box if you'd like to refer to them. Our government officials, as I said, have a role to play in creating healthier communities through housing policy. For example, our federal lawmakers can and should act to end discriminatory home loan lending practices to ensure that people of all races and ethnicities and backgrounds can access homeownership. They should also ensure that those living in federally subsidized housing live in safe and healthy conditions. It is cities and states who hold the greatest power to enact changes in the design of our local communities. State and local governments can and should invest in local housing developments that promote equitable communities, long-term affordability, especially in healthy neighborhoods. Just as our elected officials have a role to play, citizen advocacy has a significant impact on shaping the policies that govern our lives. Thanks to years of research, we know that the thing with the greatest impact over a lawmaker's decision are the stories of those in their community who are impacted by the policies they are considering. The voices of groups and individuals working on housing are key. Our signature grassroots program at the American Heart Association, called You're the Cure, harnesses the power of patients, survivors, caregivers, researchers, medical providers, all those concerned with health, to influence policy. Our advocates provide valuable testimony before legislative committees. They attend meetings with policymakers, call them to articulate a position, email materials, community facts, and personal reflections. They share their stories with the media through interviews and letters to the editor. They take every opportunity to personalize an issue and demonstrate for lawmakers the impact of their decisions and the reasons they should act. Things look a little different during a global pandemic. Our meetings are happening over Zoom, for example, instead of in person. But one thing remains: advocacy continues, and that advocacy will be a vital factor in improving housing and the overall health of our communities.
We're now going to open it up to Q&A, and I've received a couple of questions that we're going to kick it off with, and I'd ask David and Melvin to come in and field this first question, which is, we've talked a lot about multifamily housing, but is there any single family development? Melvin, I know that you guys are doing some of that separate from your enterprise relationship, but David, what's the position of enterprise on single family?
Sure. We'll work with houses of worship who are trying to do any sort of housing development. Our experience has been that most houses of worship who are looking to maintain control or ownership of the land, because of that, historically are usually doing rental, because there's a more direct route that allows them to maintain the control / ownership of the land over time. There's some examination going on. We actually had a conversation with a bank about potential models about land leases and shared equity that might allow for more of an approach around ownership for folks. And one of our houses of worship actually was looking to do more of a condo ownership approach, and then the Great Recession hit, so they had to move more towards rental. So we're open to helping a house of worship either way, but generally speaking, they tend towards rental because of that.
Yeah, I'd just add to it that for us, we were fortunate in that we had a separate entity with the capacity to do the single family. There was actually a member of our church, him and his wife are developers of single family homes for the last 20 years. And it's always funny, you can tap into your own congregation and find all kinds of talent. I would also say that if there's a land bank in your area, that would be the first place that I would go, because they really facilitate the access to these properties that are mired in taxes and liens and all these things. And they wipe all of that away and then sell you the home for probably 30 to 40 cents on the dollar, which is, from an affordability standpoint, gets you in the game, so to speak, and get your feet wet, particularly when you don't have, as most faith-based communities, they have the will to improve their communities, but they don't have the capacity. So I think that would be my first step.
I'll just say that we're primarily a multifamily developer, and that's what we do. But in a lot of the multifamily developments that we've done, and there are churches in the community that do have properties, and also land banks and other things where there are properties that we can make improvements around the multifamily developments that we are producing. So it's a win-win for us to to take a look at it, although that's not what we mostly do multifamily, but we will take a look at it. And we do have other partners that really work in that single family space, and we can bring them in. There's some community developers, so we're open to partnering and to talking with others to make that happen around the developments that we produce.
Great point.
Does this development have to be church-centric, or as we're kind of reevaluating the four walls of the church, reaching out into the community, and I think Melvin and Marcella, you've done a lot of that, can the faith organization lead the institution into the community, but does it have to be property adjacent to or actually at the house of worship?
So the short answer is no, it doesn't have to be, but it can be. And I think as I was looking at that question kind of from a couple of angles, one, in some ways, fair housing laws prohibit, you can't have like a development done, particularly using public money, that's just for members of a house of worship. So while houses of worship may be catalysts for the development of housing, it's open to the community, right? And church members are from a community. And so it'll be generally open to all. There may be ways to incentivize, make sure your members of a house of worship know about a project and have access, but it's generally.
Yeah.
But we've also seen houses of worship buy land in different places, right? There are some that we have worked with who, many own the land, kind of buy up their blocks, so to speak, things that are adjacent. But others who have bought land in places far, that are a ways away, that aren't adjacent, and they can do both.
And I'd just add to that by saying, again, the ability to, our pastor, Dr. Moss, was so prescient when he came in to establish this nonprofit community development arm, because oftentimes there are barriers to being a faith-based institution because there are certain entities that can't write you grants and those kind of things. It doesn't take a heavy lift to actually establish a nonprofit out of your church. We did it fairly seamlessly. And then, no, and I would agree with David that you don't necessarily have to own that land, but we've got a theory that within probably 3 or 4 blocks, east, west, north, and south of our church, we feel a responsibility. We've been rooted. Trinity has been there since 1961. And so we feel a responsibility to literally and physically go beyond the walls of Trinity. And there's no requirement that you have to be part of the church to do this. In fact, we encourage other entrepreneurs to also partner with the land bank for a vacant building or a vacant lot that may be next door to a property that they own. So there are many ways to access it. And I think faith-based institutions are conduits to others doing this kind of work.
We've seen faith-based organizations that have really just identified, a 5-mile radius around their property to say, this is our community, and we're not just limited to, the block where the church is located, but, a mile out. This is still impacting, the children in our community and these families. And so what happens, within this radius impacts all of our families. So we're willing to be a part of revitalization within this particular area. So it's not just that block, but they are going outside. They are buying up vacant buildings in other parts, but it's still a part of their community. So yes, I say that yes, there's an opportunity there, and it does not have to just be the church or right there at that property.
And Christy, people should know that many of the houses of worship, in most cases, the house of worship, they're going to partner with an established development company, right? Who's a professional, whether it's a mission-oriented for-profit or a nonprofit. Some will build their own capacity over time to have like a development arm, but usually the house of work, which is fine, but usually the house of worship, they're partnering in some way with an established developer to make sure that the housing gets built.
So we do have a couple of questions on how do you get your congregation or your denomination excited about this? And is that part of the training that we go through for these workshops? And is there another set of resources available for that?
Part of the conversation we have is definitely around the buy-in, kind of how do you get buy-in in the house and how do you get buy-in in the community, right? And so part of the buy-in in the house, if you would, the house of worship includes denominationally as well as at the congregational level. And so for some houses of worship, they have a connectional policy where they have to go get approvals from a bishop or some sort of entity, connectional entity. There's work, and we talk about that. And then if it's more of a congregational policy where the decision is made at the congregational level, you talk about how do you get the buy-in from the house of worship itself, and then as well, again, with folks in the community. So it is part of the conversation that we do have.
I would say because we receive, through benevolence from our church, we are funded, and certainly there is, a level of that. But I'll go back to what we said earlier in terms of that desire for residents in the community to age in place and stay in the communities that they've lived and owned. And there's a lot of people who own single family homes right now who don't need a single family home. There's too much house to manage. There may be some physical or health challenges, yet they want to stay in that community. So we've actually, we're working with 2 families now who the sons and daughters, their parents have moved in with them in other places, and now the houses are there available, but they don't want the homes to just sit there and rot. And so we're working with them to rehab those properties, put them back on the market for a new family. And I should say, you've heard about the mass exodus of African Americans, from their communities. We've actually seen an uptick, albeit a small one, but a 2% uptick in population in our predominantly African American community. So we're seeing folks coming into the community looking for affordable housing opportunities. And so there's a lot of buy-in in and around the church for us.
Part of why this collaboration with American Heart Association, Enterprise, and Kresge, and all who are on the line today is exciting is that part of making the case to a denomination, to a congregation, to a community is by showing the examples of that it works, right? Of course, there's a need, but as we lift up more examples like what we're hearing from Ms. Roberts, Mr. Thompson, and others around the country, where it demystifies this notion of why is a house of worship involved in this kind of work. And we can point to examples of a track record of good collaborations, good housing, good community facilities being built in places around the country. It gets more buy-in from potential investors, government agencies, developers, as well as the houses of worship themselves.
And the way I think if you educate people, they'll get excited about the possibilities. A lot of our houses of worship, they're financially stable and they have the capacity to get involved, but I think they lack the knowledge on what can be done. So once you educate them through workshops that Enterprise is providing and show them how to do it and give them the tools, then they're ready to jump on board. So I would highly recommend that you connect with Enterprise to maybe bring some of those workshops to your congregation or to the community and show them how they can get started with these types of initiatives.
Last thing I'll say is oftentimes the faith community is the first place where you hear bad news from the community. Someone's lost a job, someone's suffering from dementia. I mean, we're working with the American Heart Association around dementia because it runs rampant in our community. It's 2 to 1 across the country, and there's a correlation between heart health and brain health. So we're, oftentimes the first place you hear news is the pastor's office, right? And so it's a wonderful opportunity to bring solutions when congregants and people around the community come to the church looking for help.
Thank you so much. We've got a great question that expands the box of our thinking from simply housing to, does this also bring up opportunities to do commercial renewal in an area? And David, it makes me think of the house of worship that we visited in the DC area near the transit-oriented development site, where that corridor is also developing commercially. In Melvin, I think that's similar to the projects you're working on too. You want to speak to how this impacts, if you have housing, how it impacts the commercial corridors?
Yeah, I was just going to say, yes, we've definitely seen examples of it where it's how either a community facility like the one at Israel Baptist, or in some cases mixed use. We're seeing more of that with Trinity Plaza with Living Word Church in DC, where they had housing up top, and on the bottom they had a neighborhood pharmacy as well as daycare. And they had already bought up a retail strip center there and had redone that years prior. So we're seeing more of that in Baltimore. We've got a House of Worship, Southern Baptist Church, that has been involved in looking at some commercial development and as well as housing. So we're seeing certainly more examples of that. Houses of Worship can do it. And listen, if you've got, businesses look for what? Customers. Customers live where? In housing. So if you connect those dots, if you provide the customer base, it goes hand in hand.
I mentioned the renovation of the transit station a couple of years ago, where the Chicago Transit Authority owned 8 parcels, literally a full block adjacent to the station, that we're talking and praying right now that we'll be acquiring that, redevelop that. We use the Enterprise Community Partners grant to actually poll the community to get what their priorities for what those 8 or 9 parcels should look like adjacent to the station. So the affordable housing really feeds and drives the commercial, right? So when you drive down a commercial corridor and you see all of this vacancy, it doesn't necessarily reflect the strong housing component that already exists in the community, but perception often is reality. And so we're working, that's our mission, to revitalize our corridor. We just knew that it would be disingenuous for us to do that work without making sure that the housing component was strong as well.
To the information, where you got the information about today's event, there's going to be there will be more regional events and webinars that will be coming up that will be providing information. And as we start to go deeper in some places and be able to connect folks to more of this kind of training information on an even deeper level. So we're excited about that. And I think stay tuned to the outlets that got you the information for today's event. We'll be bringing you more updates in the weeks and months to come.
Thank you to everyone for your time today. We do not take it for granted. I also want to give a special thank you to all of my colleagues behind the scenes that helped make this webinar happen today. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, please enjoy your day.